I'll go ahead and begin. My name is Levi Harris, as you can see from my convenient name tag. And this is going to be, you can't take it with you. Making sure you know who gets what when you go, you know where. That's why I'm a sucker for subtitles. So.
I don't think I know where I'm going to go. But.
Well, that's a different section. All will return to dust, right? So, let's see if I can. This is a saying, probably most people are familiar with it, but it's true. You never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. And if you do, they know something that we don't. So follow and see where it's going and maybe learn something. But the idea is, it's like Terry said last night, if any of you were here, you're not going to miss a penny of it after you're gone. You can't take it with you this. Well, it's becoming redundant at this point. So we've got two parts. The church's perspective and the giver's perspective, or the parishioner's perspective. So first we're going to talk about the church's perspective. There are three types of giving. Annual pledge giving, that's what we're getting ready to start doing. Most of us probably here in a couple months. There's periodic capital giving. You have a capital campaign, you have a boiler that needs replaced, you need some tuck pointing done, you want to have a revamped fellowship hall. Then there's one like discreet, it's not secret, but like individual, extraordinary, planned giving. These are gifts that you don't know when they're going to happen. Just spontaneously you feel thankful, or spontaneously you're dead, and your will matures, as we say in the law. So in this session, we're going to obviously be talking about planned giving. This is my little representation of it, how they move through time. I don't know if that's useful or not either. But Terry did say earlier that she enjoyed the kids drawing with the orange crayons, so maybe this counts. This is what churches should do, what churches should focus on before bequests mature. Again, that's a euphemism for people die. First, you want to know what gifts and conditions you're going to accept on these bequests. And make it public. I think we get to that. Know where it will go. Alright? So know what you're going to accept. Once you've accepted it, know what the church is going to do with it. Publicize both of those two things early and often. And enroll and recognize those people who include the church in the estate plan. So we'll go through each of those. What will you accept? Okay? Somebody leaves you their miniature horse or pony or whatever this is. Will the church take that? Now that's a silly example, but we've had recently some very dear people who have left furniture, books, etc. To St. Peter's, my kitchen table, I bequeath. Well, what are you going to do with that? And if you have a use for it, that's fine. But if you know ahead of time that some of these things you're just not going to be able to accept, you can't take a lot of your leftover stuff, then people will think about that as they're making their wills and making these bequests. Where will it go? Are you requesting a $10,000 request, or are you going to round up all the kids in the neighborhood, take them on a big trip to Six Flags, and that's it? Or do you have something that's a more long-term vision for how you use bequests? And when you're thinking about that as a vestry, how many of you are on vestries or stewardship committees? When you're thinking about that, think not only what does the church need, but put yourself in the position of a person who's leaving a last will and testament, a person who may be sick, who may be on their way out. You think, I have one last chance to do something for the church, for the Lord. What would I want done with that money? And as a vestry, as a stewardship committee, try to decide to do something with these bequests that will be worth the love and the care that the person put into making those gifts in their will in the first place. Publicize the where and the what. Now this is important. You can get together as a vestry and say, okay, we're only going to take gifts of cash, stocks, dividends like that, no furniture, no polo ponies, and we're going to put it in such and such a endowment. If you only publicize that by putting it in the vestry minutes and just expect people to figure it out, people are going to know this. So people are going to still make their requests of their kitchen tables and their ponies. Or people are going to think you're going to waste my stuff because they're not going to know what you do with it. I don't know how many of you have found this to be true, but I find that you cannot say anything enough. You think, my gosh, there can't be anybody left in this church who doesn't know X, fill in the blank. And yet somebody will come up and say, well, I never heard that before. Why is this the first time I've ever heard it? Publicize it early and often. Then the last part of it, enroll and recognize donors in these programs now. Now, this is a rebus. Can anybody figure this out? I don't know if it's an official rebus. My story by picture. Anybody want to take a stab? I'm going to call on somebody. David.
I imagine it's after they've gone to the grave, it's kind of hard to get the donate.
That's right. Talking to somebody after they're dead is like banging your head against a brick wall. So very good. See, I thought it was pretty obvious.
Good IQ, that's all.
Yeah. So after you secure people's commitments, and what you're doing, you're not going around and necessarily twisting people's arms. This is not necessarily the same way that you run a pledge campaign. Because for one thing, and I think we all know this, it's very difficult to talk to people about their own demise, about you will get sick, you will die, you will someday not be here. So you got to have some sensitivity about it. But what you can do is say, every year we're going to publicize a list of these are people who have made, in their wills or in their estate plans, they've made a gift to the church. And publicize that list of names. Or if you're a plaque kind of place, if you have plaques for these kinds of things, put a plaque in. These are the people who have, remember the church in their will. And you don't necessarily have to say, okay, I'm going to need to see a copy of the will. You figure if they're going to lie about that and risk going to their glory with that on their conscience, they got more problems to worry about than you do. So on the honor system. But if you do it like this and make it aspirational, that people will look at this and say, well, say I want to do that, rather than twisting their arms. Then, not only do you get more people thinking about this ahead of time, and get people remembering the church and their estate plans, but when somebody dies, and we all will, then the church is on notice that, hey, we need to be expecting this bequest from it. If it doesn't, you need to be contacting whoever's in charge of that estate and finding out what happened to it, which does happen. So I'll stop and pause. That's the church's perspective. We'll talk a little bit more about it later in some hypotheticals. But do you have any questions about that so far?
Should you take that slide down and give me a
Thank you.
Anybody else? I mean, this part of it is pretty straightforward stuff. And I will confess, I'm an attorney and I'm a public defender. So I always say, I can't help you make a will. If you get cut out of the will and you end up killing your siblings, I can probably try to get you out of jail. But some of this stuff is just pretty basic stuff. You can remember the church in a lot of different ways. You don't just have to do it in a will. You can buy an insurance policy and make the church the beneficiary of that insurance policy. Have an extra life insurance policy. You can buy a life insurance policy, make the church the owner of the life insurance policy, and make whatever you pay on the insurance policy tax deductible every year. It's a gift to the church, and when you die, which again we all will, that money goes to the church. You can make the church sort of a leftover, so the residue of my estate to the church. You can give to the church now. I mean, the older you get, if we're really honest with ourselves, when we're 90 years old, if we're sitting on $600,000 or $700,000 or $1 million, chances are we're not going to need all of that. So you might turn loose of some of it even in your living years, and see some of the benefit of it. So we'll go to the person's perspective. We're going to talk about 4 specific documents of planned giving and advanced directives. Wills, powers of attorney for property, powers of attorney for health care, and living wills. Wills. Why should we make a will? Well, the first thing is the church says so. The Book of Common Prayer says, the minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their families, and of all persons to make wills while they are in health, arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting if they are able to leave bequests for religious and charitable uses. So it's always easy, as Terry was saying this morning, if you can put words in Jesus' mouth, that's great. Well, why? Because Jesus says so. Here, they didn't have necessarily wills back then, or if they did, we didn't hear a lot about it. But we can, the church in the prayer book says so. Number 2, why make a will? Taxes. Right now, estate taxes, if anybody pays attention to them, the last 3 years, you've had 3 different levels of estate tax. It's crazy. If you talk to a estate tax, is anybody an estate tax lawyer or estate? No. If you talk to them, they're doing booming business because people are just terrified that they're going to screw up and get taxed at an insane amount. So, if you make a will, you can sort of navigate some of these things ahead of time. 3, to make charitable gifts or legacy gifts, which that's what we were talking about earlier. 4 is for your own clarity and your family's peace. It is a terrible thing for somebody to die without a will, and you've got a big family that fights over some stuff. If you've ever seen it happen, you've probably heard stories, maybe it's happened to you. It's terrible. You can weed out a lot of that stuff. And I got a sister, and I love her to death. But she's the type of person who doesn't want to think about any of that. I don't want to think about death. Whatever you guys want to do with me, if I'm killed or if I have a disease or whatever, just bury me, do whatever you want. It's fine with me. Well, I know it's fine, but that doesn't help us because then it's going to be, well, what would she have wanted for her funeral? What would she have wanted done with all of this stuff? And thankfully, she's getting married sometime in the next year, so that'll be her husband's problem to deal with, and not my parents and mine to sort out if I'm still alive when she goes. Makes it a lot more easy for your family if you've got a will. And 5 is say so. And I like this one because I like to be in control. I'm one of these people that is a micromanager of everything. And so this is your last chance to really kind of boss people around. This is what you will do with my stuff, and you have to do it. It's in my will. So from beyond the grave, you get to be a little bossy. This is another thing Terry's already said. If you don't have a will, the state of Illinois has one for you. They're not just going to, read a crystal ball or consult a medium to see what you want. It's already decided if you don't have a will, this is where your stuff will go. And it may be where you want it to go. It may not be. So what should be in...
Illinois needs that.
I may have skipped ahead. No, I didn't. Why now? Huh? I'm on page 20. I'm not in the book. Okay. No, I'm in my book. There again, I'm in control. I've got my own book. So, why now? I'm 30 years old. Just turned 30. Why should I have a will at this age? Well, people don't just die in old age, and that's why it's not as important to sort of circle around like a vulture your old members in your churches to talk about bequests and planned gifts. For one thing, it's a lot more scary to them, maybe, because you're not talking about an eventuality 50 years down the road. You're talking about something that may happen in the next couple of years. But 2, you never know when people are going to die. So if you wait and only talk to people who are 70, 80 years old, that's not helping the worst case scenario, which is you have a car accident, you have a stroke, whatever. We just lost my grandmother a couple of months ago. She was 82, but she was very healthy. She was still working several days a week. And she had a stroke, and she's gone. She's gone. So death doesn't really just wait for us to make a plan. What should be in a will? A Christian preamble. Has anybody ever heard of doing this in a will? You're nodding your head over here. Is it boring? I think this is a great idea. I had not heard of this until very recently. But this is basically sort of a preamble or a preface to your will. I, Levi Harris, being of sound mind and body, because being thankful for all that God has done for me, and wanting in this last act to do something that's a testament to God's grace and to His boundless love, I therefore bequeath, etc. Why do you do that? Because I guarantee you, if you've got family members, even if you haven't seen it for years, they're going to crawl out of the woodwork when they know that somebody has died and there is a will. And this is a last chance for you to be a witness to them and tell them what was truly important to you. They may not listen to anything that you tell them live, but boy, they're going to be there waiting, licking their chops when that will is read. And this is something there again that you can tell them from beyond the grave. Disposition of your real personal and financial assets. There again, I mean, these are real, that's things like houses, property. Personal, that's your papers, your books, your dog, and your financial assets. 3, provision for your family, pets, and or friends. Those of you who have children, I hope all of you have a will and have named guardians for them. Those of you who have not updated your will since your children were still of age to need a guardian should probably revisit those.
How often should it be revised?
They say every 5 years, or if you have a major life change. You have a marriage, you have a divorce, you have a death, you have new children, children leave home. Major life changes for 5 years. And then bequest for the church and for charities. One thing you should tell people, and one thing you should be conscious of in your own estate planning, is, it can always be a little scary. Well, how can I give the church anything? I don't know what I'm going to have when I'm gone. You can give us a percentage. You can say a percent. I give 10% of the residue of my estate. I give 10% on the top of my estate. So, what's 10% of 0? Nothing. You don't have anything. You don't have to worry about it. It's not like they're going to take it out of you. Take an arm and a leg off of your. Anyway. How should I make a will? Will lawyers help? And this is what they all look like, right? This smart guy in a Groucho Marx costume. Why do I say that? Well, I've already told you I'm a public defender. I'm not going to get any money from you doing this. But the reason you need a lawyer is that this is complicated stuff. This is why people pay $150,000 and spend 3 years in law school. This is why they go to their continuing education every year to stay up on the changes in the law. I know a lot of folks have these, you buy a CD and you make your own will. And there are 2 problems with that. 1, you don't know the quality of what you're getting. 2, if you make your own will and there's a mistake in it, when are you going to find that out? I mean, probably when you die, right? And then that's when you're going to figure out, that clause that I thought meant so-and-so gets this doesn't actually do that. It's too late to fix it. So one thing that I say, lawyers and doctors would have this rivalry. Nobody would try to perform brain surgery on himself, right? You wouldn't stand there with a scalpel here and try to cut out the tumor. So why would you try to make your own will? Pay the couple $100 that it's going to cost. Go and get it right. And the litigious reason, by the way, if you screw it up and you do it yourself, you don't have anybody you can sue. If a lawyer screws up your will, you're going to be gone. But your kids, if they get screwed out of a bequest that you wanted to leave them, they can sue for malpractice and have some kind of recovery for that. That's why lawyers have malpractice.
How would they recognize? How would they know that what you intended?
You would have to have other evidence of it. If your mom had written you a letter that says, don't worry, my will takes care of this. I mean, you can prove it just like anything else. How do you prove somebody's not guilty? The answer is not very well. That's why they're public defenders. But anyway. Bottom line, again, I don't know what the Groucho thing is. Buy the bullet, buy the whole gun, get the lawyer.
Levi, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Here, at this point, let's say a parishioner already has a will. Is it appropriate for us as a church to say, if you want to amend your will to include a bequest to the church, here's a model amendment you could use?
Yeah. Matter of fact, our treasurer tells me that we used to publish, it hasn't been in my time here in 5 years, but before that we used to publish a sample language of that in our newsletter. I don't know if every time or a few times a year, which has the double benefit of you remind people, oh yeah, I don't have a will, or if I need to change my will, now's a good time to do it. But 2, you give people what they need. Pull this out, put it in your will, and it operates to do what you need it to do. And the thing is, we're not trying to trick people out of money. It's just like all of stewardship. You're trying to give them another opportunity to do something with their money that they really value that's going to have perhaps eternal significance. So don't think of it as you're trying to weasel more out of it. But yeah, that would be perfectly appropriate. What is the power of attorney for property? Does anybody have these power of attorney for property? This authorizes someone else to act on your behalf for financial transactions. You can have it become effective now. You can have it become effective at age certain. Say, on my 90th birthday, my son is going to be my power of attorney, or on incapacity. If I am in coma, if I'm in a permanent vegetative state, if I have a stroke and I'm not able to do this. So, for instance, I just talked about my grandma. My uncle was her power of attorney for property. My mom, who's a nurse practitioner, was her power of attorney for healthcare. So my uncle handles paying the bills, making those kinds of decisions, and mom took care of, the other stuff. The other thing about these is they can cease on a date certain or upon regaining capacity. I think every time, this is sort of a little bit different, but every time President Bush, you don't hear about President Obama's health things as much as you do President Bush, but President Bush, when he would go in for a colonoscopy, if they would sedate him, they would have Dick Cheney sort of there to do whatever presidency to do in that situation. You can do the same thing. You don't have to be the president, all right? You can say, I'm going in for a open heart surgery. I want this person to be acting as my power of attorney for property during that time. Most of the time, you're not going to need that. But let's say you're trying to sell a house, and you've got people who are about to come to look at it, whatever. You trust somebody's judgment. Make them your power of attorney to sell your house or to sell your car or something like that. And you can say, when I wake up from surgery, it ceases. This would more often operate for a power of attorney for healthcare, I think, but you could do this. These are very simple to make. Unlike a will, this is not rocket science. Let me skip ahead to this one. There are forms in your life planning manual, which it's right after the orange section of your thing. There's a form for a power of attorney for property, health care, and also there's a living will. You fill this out, you have it witnessed. Talk to people before you decide that you're going to make them a power of attorney. They may be surprised when they're supposed to be paying the bills. But that's very simple. Do I need a power of attorney? Well, I say, unless you're in a marriage or civil union that's valid in Illinois, with a spouse you trust completely with your finances, then yes. If your wife or husband is completely terrible about paying the bills and you are going to be, have a major surgery, or you're experiencing dementia, maybe you've got Alzheimer's or something like that, and you want to make sure that they are not going to give away the farm, then you need to have this conversation and make somebody else your power of attorney for property. There again, when my grandma was alive, which was several years ago now, but he and grandma both had my uncle as their power of attorney for property because, and it wasn't to demean her, but grandma was not the money side of the operation, And so that was something that grandpa and grandma both decided, if I'm not able to do this, if grandpa can do it, my uncle would do it. Do you have any questions before I move on to power of attorney for health care?
What happens if nobody does not have one in that situation?
We will get to that. I got hypotheticals.
Just as a comment, what I think surprises a lot of people who are entrusted with power of attorney is that upon the death of the person, that's no longer in effect.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think most ordinary lay people understand that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what it should. There are some states, I think, where powers of attorney last even beyond that. In my uncle's case, for instance, he's also the executor of their state, which is a separate thing.
But isn't there a gap in between power of attorney ending and the will has to be probated before the executor can function?
Well,
I mean,
if the will goes to
right
probate,
checks.
some wills don't go to probate. Particularly if they're very simple, they don't always have to do that. So there again, this is getting sort of to the outer limits of my competence.
Are you going to go through the programs you folks run here? Or?
Yeah. I mean, actually, yes, I can do that. I can tell you about our aspirations for we're in the process of forming.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see your full agenda. So towards the end, you would talk about what you've done yourself here.
Yeah.
How you folks are handling that.
Yeah. How are we doing on time? What time are we supposed to stop? 2:30? 215, I think. Okay.
245 is right.
245. Okay, well, we may not go that long. What is the power of attorney for health care? This authorizes somebody else to act on your behalf for your health care decisions. Okay, so this is surgery, treatment, medication, etc. And again, it can become effective now, it can become effective at a date, it can become effective when you go into surgery or whatever. And if you don't intend for it to last until you die, be sure and put an ending date on it, or an ending condition, otherwise it will last. This is my joke. You remember this movie. This is not the situation you want to find yourself in with your healthcare power of attorney. Somebody's not looking for you. So pick somebody you trust. Do I need one? Unless you're in a marriage or civil union with a spouse you trust completely with your, this is finance and property, with your healthcare decisions, then yes. Any questions about that? That's pretty straightforward. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, this is the Terry Schiavo type situations that you find yourself in. And there again, it doesn't happen to that many people, but then when it happens to you, by the time it does, it's too late.
So if you didn't have one, your spouse would automatically be.
Right. By default, your spouse, if you're married, your spouse would be the person who would.
And if you had a spouse, then your oldest child, or how would that be?
If you had children, your children sort of.
Your children.
Yeah, all of your children have to make a decision. For instance, my partner's stepfather passed away this spring, and very suddenly it was another stroke. I mean, he was instantly, sort of brain dead. It was a situation where both of his sons had to get together and decide, well, we're going to donate his organs, when are we going to turn off life support? You know he's not there. But it was a decision that they had to come to together because there had been no back to him. I mean, this is a 50-year-old guy. You don't think about it at that age.
So just to be clear, as a unanimous decision.
I mean, I don't know what they're.
Who talks louder in the room, kind of thing.
Organ donation has to be unanimous.
One thing about powers of attorney is you can't nominate co-powers of attorney. Okay, you nominate one. If that one can't do it, then you've got a successor power of attorney. You can't nominate two because
In
that's
the case of 2 or 3 children, if one disagrees with the other two, then there's a stalemate of sorts.
I mean, I would think so. I would think so. I
Depends on what
wouldn't
it's
think
been
so.
argued.
It's not a seniority thing, like the eldest.
I wouldn't think so. We did away with primogeniture had its perks, I mean, the oldest son gets the estate, the oldest son gets to make the decisions. I'm the oldest son, so what we're going on for me.
I know, okay, I've been through that.
Yeah.
So my mother had an interest in healthcare decisions that to be made. They went to my older sister, and she pretty much made all the decisions and kind of informed us after the fact. As to,
Sound like advocates delegated.
no, my mother went into the hospital, she
Oh,
showed
I got
up,
it,
doctor
got it.
said what he wants to do,
Okay.
she made the decision.
Okay.
So it's basically, decisions had to be made. It wasn't like there was time to say, excuse me, I gotta call my other 4 siblings
Yeah,
to
that's
find out
okay.
what to do. It was boom, 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 boom.
So there again, there are forms in the back that you can make. Again, this is not rocket science, but I would say talk it over with. Using again my grandparents as an example. My grandpa had cancer for 6 years. I don't think he thought he was going to die until very close in, so he didn't want to talk about this kind of stuff. I don't need to talk about whether I want life-sustaining treatment or whatever. If my heart stops, do I want to be resuscitated? These are things you have to ask. Right now, if my heart stops, before we're done, please resuscitate it, even if you don't have it. But if you've got terminal cancer, that's a different calculus. If you're 95 years old, what is a living will? A living will is a document you can declare your desire to have death delaying procedures withheld or withdrawn in the event you've been diagnosed with a terminal condition by a physician. Do I need one? Actually, if you have a power of attorney for healthcare, you trust that person, just talk it over with them, it'll be simpler. This can actually kind of confuse things because you've got a living will that says this is what I want, and then your healthcare power of attorney saying another thing, then you've got another one of those confusing situations. But if you don't have healthcare power of attorney and you do want to make some of these things clear, this would be a vehicle for you to do that.
So
So that doesn't take precedence over the health? Or is it?
I'm pretty sure that the healthcare power of attorney, if you have that document and you have delegated that to them, then they are the one who's in charge, so that would override. And the thing is, if you change your mind, let's say you feel bad one day, I don't want to be resuscitated. You change your mind, you can always tell your buddy, I changed my mind, please, keep me on life support, bring me back, whatever. Easier than you can go and re-execute another one of these documents.
Okay.
How does this work in real life? Okay, these are our hypotheticals. This is where we got to put on our thinking caps. Let's do situation one. Jacob and Levi are in a civil union in the state of Illinois, and Jacob's primary life insurance beneficiary, Levi's primary life insurance beneficiary is Jacob. Levi's mom is the secondary beneficiary. Levi and Jacob drive to Orland Park, Illinois for guilty pleasure Chick-fil-A. On the way home, Levi goes into a food coma and drives into the Plains River where they both die. Who gets Levi's life insurance benefits?
His mother.
Anybody have a dissenting opinion?
What about the estate of, I forgot who's with the name, one of the other guys?
Mm-hmm. If they're both dead at this point.
Levi's mother gets.
The answer is it depends on necessarily the wording of the policy, but it may come down to whether doctors can determine who died first. Okay? If Jacob died first, then Jacob wasn't alive at the time Levi died for his benefits to pass to him. Okay? If Jacob dies first, Levi's stuff goes to Levi's mother. If Jacob dies second, the stuff for an instant would go to him and pass to his heirs. Okay? So it could end up in a situation if you didn't have a will, let's say, and a lot of these wills have what they call simultaneous death provisions, where you say, okay, if we die within the same 36, 48, 50, however many hours of each other, we're going to presume that we died, we predeceased each other. And so what that would have the effect of doing is one person's stuff would go to really who they wanted the secondary beneficiary to be, and vice versa. Because if you don't, what could end up happening is Jacob's parents, or his heirs, and Levi's mom could end up suing each other over their life insurance benefits, having an argument over who died first. So you can avert this by having wills with simultaneous death provisions. Situation 2A. Now put on your vestry and stewardship committee hats here. Your parishioner Thomas Cranmer dies, so his will is read. You learn he has left your church $10 million on the condition that the parish return to using exclusively the 1549 prayer book. Do you accept the bequest? Assume for the moment that canonically you could get away with that individual putting money.
Well, then you would accept it.
If you accept it, you have to accept the provision.
That's right. That's right. And that's why I say talk about these things ahead of time. Because you don't have the option of taking it and just say, the heck with Thomas Cranmer, we're just going to keep using this prayer. You'd be in big trouble. Situation 2B. Instead, suppose the stipulation is that the church would never cease using the 1979 prayer. Do you accept the gift? I mean, $10 million, we all like a prayer book, right? I mean, we don't want it to change. Most of us don't anyway. I shouldn't say that. I'm one of these buddy buddies that never wants anything to change, so.
I just think in principle, those kinds of restraints are manipulative, and the church needs to be prepared to not be co-opted by those kinds of restraints. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, I'll give you another example from our situation. We had a very generous request long, long ago for a men and boys choir. Okay? And this, I believe in the request, Jack, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm sitting in on all these things, but it's, it's, if it ceases to go for this men and boys choir, at least within a certain amount of time, then it's supposed to go to somebody else. Right. So then the question becomes, well, we don't have a men and boys choir anymore because, women are a full part of our life together, and women are in the choir. So does that count? If you don't have any boys, you don't have any children, does that count? So you get into these things. So it's very generous, and it's been got to be careful as you manage these things, and that's what you're talking about. For right now, you're already using the 1979 prayer book. In 20 or 30 years, when they change the prayer book, are you going to want to be bound by that?
Well, you alluded to this earlier, that it's important for vestries and endowment committees to discuss this in advance. For example, after General Convention in 2003, our vestry discussed in advance what we would do if somebody put strings like that on their pledge or on any kind of giving. And we did. We got a donation that said none of this can go to the national church.
In other words, designated gifts.
And we decided in advance, which made it a lot easier, that no, we would not accept gifts that had those kinds of strings attached.
Well, this is one thing that I think is better just for stewardship more broadly, even than planned giving. I have problems with some of the stances that the Episcopal Church takes on things. Okay, I don't always agree with the Episcopal Church. I grew up with Southern Baptists. I don't agree with everything that they do. But when you're giving that money, you're not giving it to a program. You're not giving it to a politics. You're giving it to God. And how that gets filtered out is not, after all, your business. You've done what you need to do, and you let them go that money and give back to your maker. Okay? So that's what you have to tell people. And it is hard sometimes. I mean, it's something, you know, when you go to the diocese convention and they vote down your resolution, you get ticked off. I'm not going to, you know, I don't want to support this diocese anymore. You have to let go of that.
Question. If you accept this and you use a certain amount of that $10 million, what happens if the church changes the prayer book 10 years from now? What happens to that? Or again, is that something?
It would depend on how the bequest was set up, whether there was a trustee to administer this or not. If there were a trustee, then the trustee could actually sue to enforce that provision of the will. It's less clear to me what would happen if there were not a trustee.
A lot of times you'll set up a secondary provision, so in the case that you're down and somebody else is needed, if you don't do that, that's the policing action right there. That person wants, that organization wants the endowment, so they'll figure out how to check in. That's typically how you see it in churches.
And that brings us to our next example. 20 years ago, parishioner Johann Sebastian died with this bequest. I bequeath $10 million to St. Sexford, and there's a real saint, to use as long as the organ is the only instrument in the liturgy. If any other instruments are used, into the 700.
Sorry.
Last night, a very misfortunate night, the vestry approved the rector's recommendation to begin worshiping exclusively with guitar bands. What happens to the $10 million? We've already heard it. If I can get to it. 700 Club is Pat Robertson. Unless the vestry changes its mind, you might see Pat Robertson on your doorstep serving you papers saying something like this. And this is the only creativity lawyers can do. Maggie and Miller are newlyweds with great jobs, a $500,000 home, 2 imported cars, 2 well-behaved dogs, and no kids, like I'm sure all of us in this room. Great life. They're very happy, despite the fact Miller's family thinks he married beneath his station. Miller's mother calls Maggie that wench who stole my princeling. On a belated honeymoon safari, Miller and Maggie are stampeded by wildebeest and die instantly. But who gets their cars, the dogs, the house, and everything in it? No, they didn't have one. Unless they have wills, Miller's family could get everything, and Maggie's family could not get a dime. They're again going back to whichever one of them died first.
Or the other way around, if it was, would it be the other way around if the other one died first?
Right. I mean, and you would locate it. I mean, you hope that your families are not going to be litigious about this stuff, but if there's one thing that can make normally civil people wicked and nasty and vicious, it's money.
Especially after a death.
Right, right. Because somebody's going to be getting that money. It might as well be me. You know, it's not like you'll just give it up and then it'll go to charity. You know, if you don't get it, your sister's going to get it, your brother's going to get it, or whoever. Jacob and Levi, the aforementioned civilly united, are at a pub watching a presidential debate on TV. A furious patron hurls a mug of beer at Levi, leaving him comatose and in dire need of dangerous brain operation. Can Jacob authorize the surgery?
Yes.
Yes, just as a husband can authorize surgery for a wife and vice versa, he can make that decision. But suppose instead of a pub accident, Levi was injured when his inner tube sailed off the edge of a water slide into Wisconsin Dells. Could Jacob authorize surgery?
Sure.
In Wisconsin?
Sure.
No.
No?
Oh, because they don't recognize.
Wisconsin does not allow or recognize civil use. Thus, powers of attorney are useful for people who might not believe they need them. This is a real chance for education for churches to do with people in their parish who may, be gay, to realize that, okay, just because, the Diocese of Chicago welcomes you, State of Illinois welcomes you, there are places that don't. If you're traveling, particularly if you're going to go mountain climbing in, Idaho, these are some things you might want to think about, because Idaho is not going to treat your relationship the same way that the State of Illinois would. And it also goes, that's an extreme example, but that also goes, there are different rules in every state for probating of wills, for who, some states your kids get things per stirpe, sometimes they get it a different way, sometimes spouses get bigger shares. So a lot of this can depend on where you die, where your property is, etc.
Does it make it, is it where you die or is it where you reside?
It can be where you reside, where you don't. Let's say you reside here, you have a business that's incorporated in Delaware, and you own vacation property in Florida, and you die while you're in Florida. Well, where do all those assets get disposed of? There again, that's why you talk to a lawyer. I don't know.
You said the term per stirpe?
Per stirpes.
Per stirpe.
Which means by the
spell
witness,
that?
I think. Huh?
Can you spell that?
Yeah, it's S-T-I-R-P-E-S.
S-T-I-R-P-E-S.
That means what?
By the roots. It means roots. Per stirpes means for each root.
So, in other words, evenly distributed among the siblings.
Let me give you an example. Let's say there's a brother and a sister, and there's a mom, and sis has 2 children. Let's say sis is dead, so there's a brother and 2 children. In some states, they would inherit if there's no will. You get a third, you get a third, you get a third. In some states, he gets half because he is the son. These 2 have to split the other half between them, okay? Now, I believe in Illinois that's how it works.
Brother.
Yeah.
Sister, brother, and her 2 kids.
Right. So it can work differently in different places. If you go to Louisiana, which is based on civil law, based on French tradition rather than English.
That also cuts out a spouse of one of the offspring, correct? If you're per stirpe, because they're not.
I don't know how that works. Let's say, like you're saying, a brother and a sister. Sister's dead, but her husband's still alive.
Exactly.
I don't think husband gets
it
it.
on, right?
Yes. It would go straight to the children.
If it's brother or sister,
Spouse or sister is cut out. So
not the spouse would get it.
No.
not with that clause.
Right. Okay. Situation number 5.
Very interesting clause.
Rob and Laura have lived together as husband and wife for 20 years without benefit of the clergy, as the saying goes. Rob has a son from a previous marriage, Mel. Rob and Laura raised Laura's son, Richie, from her previous marriage. I'm sure Rob and Laura would be scandalized to know that they've been living in sin in my power plant. Rob trips over an ottoman, cracks his skull, and winds up on life support. Doctors give him a 15% chance of recovery without severe permanent brain damage. Laura and Richie hold out hope, but Mel wants to call it a day. What happens?
Mel gets it.
Does everybody agree? Yeah. Unless Rob's made Laura raise his power of attorney, sayonara Robert. Because there's no common law marriage in Illinois. You hear about people who say, well, I guess we're just what you call common law marriage. These people definitely need a lawyer, right? You don't hear that a lot up here. They don't know, well, I guess you're what we call common law marriage. You're not.
It's not recognized legally. Common law marriage is not.
In most states, it's not.
What?
In a lot of states, it's not recognized as a legal marriage.
So there again, you have a guy who's realized only too late he should have had this thought of earlier. Situation number 6. Chubby has terminal brain cancer and tells his family he doesn't want to be resuscitated if his heart stops. At one last taste of Chicago, Chubby chokes on a slice of Giordano's. He stops breathing, his heart stops. His family members tell the EMTs, don't resuscitate him. What happens to Chubby? I should say his family members, not his wife. His cousins.
They were resuscitating.
Right. Unless Chubby's healthcare power of attorney is standing there saying, let him go, or the EMTs have a copy of Chubby's living will, he will come back to life and die of cancer. This is why, and I didn't mention this earlier, if you've got a living will or healthcare power of attorney, get that to your doctor, your primary care physician, get that to the hospital where you're treated. And if you're traveling someplace, keep a copy of it in your car. You know, if you have a car accident, because the reality of it is, there again, if you want to be resuscitated, that's the default. But how terrible would it be if you did have a heart attack or something, you wanted to go, you knew you had terminal illness, and they brought you back.
That's happened too.
Right. I make light of this only because it's such a dire subject, but yeah, Chubby should have planned ahead. Alright, we're getting close to the end of these, and then I want to talk just a little bit about our what we're doing in our church. A little bit. Situation number 7. After decades of marriage, Joanna decides enough is enough. She divorces Don, but forgets to take him off of her life insurance beneficiary forms. Don remarries a Polka dancer named Helga and gets a nightly job playing the accordion at the Chicago Brauhaus, the German beer student. And here's what I imagine is an artist rendering of Don and Helga. Joanna remarries too a dashing Frenchman named Francois. 10 years later, while feasting on Francois' delicious French cuisine, Joanna gets a bad claim of inheritance. A mutual friend drives to the Brauhaus to tell Don, but when Don hears news, he dies of a heart attack. The Brauhaus have to finally caught up with him. So who gets Joanna's life insurance and pension benefits?
Don's wild.
I got lost in that.
Roll out the girl is Helga's lucky day. So this is not that extreme example. There was a major Illinois Supreme Court case last year, or perhaps 2 years ago, where this very thing happened. That there was this divorce that happened years and years and years ago, and the wife had declared that at the time they were married, I want the husband to be the beneficiary of my retirement account and my life insurance. Forgot to change that. She dies years later. She's got kids by another marriage. She's got a spouse by another marriage. And all that money goes to the crummy guy that she left all that way back when, because what's on those forms will control. Okay? You can't say in your will, I changed my mind, I want my life insurance to go to somebody else. Life insurance and those retirement accounts, you got to change with those holders, okay, on the policy themselves. This is the last situation. Clifford dies at 87, 5 years after his wife married. They had 5 children, 16 grandchildren, and too many great-grandchildren to count, and a farm, a sturdy house full of lifetime of treasures, including quilts, doilies, tobacco pipes, books, crockery, and furniture. Clifford dies without a will, and his kids cannot agree who gets what. What happens? Another guess?
They have an option.
In all likelihood, they have an option. Where cousins will bid against cousins, sisters against brothers, and you watch all these treasures get away because the kids couldn't agree who gets them. And, you know, the state, we keep hearing about the state's really not going to get it, because it's not the state. I mean, you have heirs, but if the heirs can't decide how it gets split up, then the only equitable way is you got to sell everything and split the money. So that rather than having grandma's priceless quilts and her doilies and all that stuff, all you've got is just a handful of cash. So this is a good example for kids and grandkids to sort of put some of these petty things aside and get along. But it's also a reminder to grandma and grandpa, take care of this stuff, because you don't want your kids fighting over your stuff when you're gone. And if it means something to you, if it's important to you that the kids take this and value it, give it to them while you're alive. It'll mean more anyway, you know. And that's one thing my grandma did do, I'm happy to say, when Grandpa died, she started realizing, I'm not going to be here forever. Here, take this quilt. Take this dish. This belonged to so-and-so. This is why I have it. Take it, you know. A lot of people say, well, I've written on the back of a lot of stuff where I want it to go. That has no binding value. So if you got great kids, fine, it'll work out. If you got normal kids who will fight over things, then, you know, that's not going to do it. Go ahead and give it to them in their lifetime. In the end, we are resurrection people. This comes from our creed. one Holy Catholic Church and Apostolic Church. We look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Our souls are in God's hands. We don't need to worry about our souls, all right? We confess Christ as Savior. We're taking care of, we know where we're going to be. But who's going to get our stuff? Who's going to take care of everything when we're gone? We can take care of that ahead of time. And I believe that God is a God of order. You know, creation is an orderly thing. The week, the day, and the night, you see God's handiwork and God's order and everything. And our lives, as best we can, should be a reflection of that order. So that is what I have about that. Now, if you have any questions about that, go ahead and raise your hand. If not, I want to talk a little bit about it.
Just a quick question. When you were talking about people leaving things like their furniture and that kind of stuff to the church, are we obligated as the church to hand out information that can't happen?
I would, particularly if you've met, just what Laura was talking about, I think, talking about as an investor, what do you do when these things come to you with strings attached, or it comes, and because the individual who left us a kitchen table was a very involved member here. I mean, it wasn't just somebody, she was here every Sunday. And so, if you have those people, they're trying to do something that's helpful and loving. And so help them know, this is what we really could use from you. This is how we can best carry out God's mission for us in the community and in the world, is with a gift like this. Some places could really use a kitchen table. We just bought these new tables. We got a lot of tables. Some places may need a table. So, but if you know these things ahead of time, it's a lot better to tell people, and then they'll think, well, maybe that's not a very good request. Maybe I should go do something else. It's a lot better than telling your kids, we don't want this. Then that's an offensive thing. You don't want to be in a position of telling anybody, no, we don't want to take your stuff. So, any other questions about this part of it?
Is a parent in Illinois an implicit power of attorney for offspring?
For a minor child,
Not minor, for an adult.
I didn't hear your question, sir.
Is a parent of an adult child an implicit power of attorney?
Yes. So, for instance, right now, if my sister were in a car accident today, even though she's got a whatever you call it, the boyfriend is going to be the husband, fiance, mom and dad would make that decision. Okay.
Until she's married, right?
Right. And this is the Terry Shiloh situation, where you had a man who is her husband, and when he's her husband, he is also by default her power of attorney. And then you got these parents who are very sympathetic people. They love their daughter, they don't want to let her go. So then you got this terrible situation. But if you think about it, that's an extreme case. 9 times out of 10, who is going to be the person who knows your wishes and knows you best call and knows what you want? It's going to be your spouse. 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, these things work out. It makes sense that your spouse is going to be the one that makes that call. It's not a crazy thing. It's just like 99 times out of 100, your kids are going to be the ones that you want to get most of your stuff. That 1 time out of 100, you got that terrible kid that's going to either take it and buy drugs with it, or go gambling away, or do something with it. You know that it's not going to be good for them to have it. You don't want them to have it. And there are people. Warren Buffett, for instance, has told his kids, I believe, I'm not just going to leave all this stuff to you. I earned it. You need to earn it. That's part of the fun. That's part of the process. I'm going to give as much of it away as I can. So,
isn't Warren Buffett in the process of doing it?
What are they giving away? 10% of their wealth, right, or 50%?
No,
At least
90%.
90%.
He's a 90 guy, yeah, but he's looking for 50%.
Yeah. Well, if we could just get some 10%ers, right? That would help our situation out. Let me tell you just a little bit about what we're trying to do here, what we're thinking about. I shouldn't say trying to do, because we haven't talked to our investor and gotten through about this, but this is just the things we've been brainstorming for 2 years here at St. Peter's. Have any of you ever been to a TENS conference at the Episcopal Network for Stewardship? Okay, we got this idea from them. And what it is, there's a church in New Orleans called Trinity Episcopal Church. And they have what they call a perpetual memorial. Okay? Because what they were having people, they got these very wealthy, old money, Southern Belles and families down there in New got to have a memorial chapel to be off to the side, or you've got to have a steeple for it, or you've got to have this, that, and the other. Well, it gets to be where your church is just, a reliquary for a lot of dead, well-meaning parishioners. So they said, how can we sort of harness this energy, harness this love that people obviously have in this place, keep their name alive, pay tribute to them, and honor their gift, but do it in a way that is more useful for the mission of the church rather than just for decorating or something like that. So what they did is they created this endowment. They got an initial bequest of, I don't know, $50,000, $60,000, something like that. And they created this new endowment that they called the Perpetual Memorial. And what they decided is all bequests are going to go into this endowment. Okay? All unrestricted bequests, I should say. If it's a restricted bequest, you have two options. Either do what the restriction says or reject the bequest. But if you get an unrestricted bequest, it goes in this pot. And then what they also do is they have what are called living endowments. So they don't just wait for people to die. On All Saints, they hand out these things for people to say, in thanksgiving for my grandma and grandpa who meant so much to me and showed me the ways of Christ, I donate this money. It goes into the pot. Okay? So that you have people who are alive giving money, you have people who are leaving memorials to the church. You always fill out the little envelopes when you go to the funeral home or to the funeral. All those memorials go into this endowment pot. And then what they do is once a year they publish a book that is a list of every person who has been honored, grandma and grandpa, so-and-so, etc. Every bequest that has come in that year, so that's everybody that's died and left money to the church, and every person who has donated to that fund in the year. Now, they don't break it out to where, let's use me as an example. Let's say I give an honor to my grandparents, my parents, and some swell person that I know. They don't break it out and say Levi gave $100 here, $100 here, $100 here. They just publish Levi gave this year, and these people, were given to. And then they keep a running tally of that. That's the perpetual part of the memorial. They keep a running tally of that year to year, I assume using a spreadsheet program, so that basically you watch that grow. You watch it grow over time. If every year on Grandma's birthday you chunk in $50, then it's going to grow by $50 every year. The reality of it is it's not in 40 million different accounts. It's all just in one thing. You just keep track of the principal as it comes in. Don't worry about the growth of the income. Now, what they do with their, down there, they use it for what they call clergy excellence. Their endowment has grown so large at this point, it's $4.8 million or something like that. They finance the rector's salary and benefits. I think they have another staff member, I don't know if it's assisting clergy or curator or whatever they finance with that. And then they also do mission projects with them. What we've been talking about doing here is using it to finance building maintenance. And if you were here last night listening to Terry, that's kind of the theory that we went on, that it's a lot more fun to do mission and ministry than it is to say, well, we need 4 light bulbs this month, So hopefully, if this is approved and if we're able to use it, this will start to generate enough income that the building needs can be taken care of. How many of you have an old building? Like an old building? I mean, old buildings are harder to take care of than new buildings. But any buildings are going to have problems. So that's what we're thinking about doing with ours so that we can finance our mission and ministry with our pledge giving.
How? Are we going to do that?
How what?
All right, so we know what you're going to do, but what are you proposing? Maybe you don't have the framework around this, so what did Trinity do? They go and meet with these folks, they announce it at a congregational meeting, and start a formalized program around it. What was the messaging like? How they get this out, rolled out?
Well, I've got an example of their book here.
Are you familiar with I think TENS puts it out. There's a program called the Future, I'm blanking, it has Future in it. And it's a whole notebook with a CD version with every step of how to set up an endowment.
Are you talking about the endowment stuff, or are you talking about more the front of house type messaging and selling it to people?
I think the back end, I mean, I think you consult the lawyer, you get that also in the form for what you're going to do, set it up. So I think that's what you're talking about, just the forms we have, the process of going about it. I'm just curious what works for the parishioners themselves, the selling of it.
There are some ideas about that in that program, but we could share ideas. St. Bartholomew's in Atlanta, which has a legacy society, publicizes it to the parish, invites people to make their contribution. Every year they have a Eucharist followed by a champagne reception for new and existing members. So they keep that in front of the parish every year.
What we're talking about doing, and we haven't nailed down all the details or even gotten approval, this may never come to fruition. But what we're talking about doing is focusing on all souls. Our rector, we used to sort of lump all saints and all souls under the same thing, and she's very big, and I agree with her liturgically. All souls is its own thing. And this is really an all souls type of thing. We're not celebrating necessarily St. Francis or St. Augustine. We're celebrating the people in our lives. So this is the inside of what they do. When they publish it, they don't just publish the list of names. They publish, this is what we're doing with this money. This is the transparency. This is how it's being invested. They publish, these are some mission projects that we funded with this in the past year. So this is what your donations have been able to do. This is how big the corpus has grown, from this size.
That's from Trinity? Mm-hmm. That's shareable?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's probably on their website.
Is that on the website?
If it's not, I can send you this PowerPoint. As a matter of fact, I'd be happy to do it because I put a lot of work into it, and either we'll get a yay or a nay, but either way, I'm never going to be able to show the PowerPoint again, so somebody else should be.
Why would you not be able to show it again?
Because, once it's there, and once it's, I don't mean the one I just did, I mean this one I'm using, which is about the memorial.
What, I guess, Kevin, not a Episcopal, and I'm just curious, why would you have put 2 years into this before you ever talked to the pastor?
We did because we're dreaming and brainstorming.
But it seems to me like it'd be terribly discouraging to put 2 years into something and have it totally shut down.
We can talk about that over here. This is my name.
I know, but
my biggest word, my biggest hope.
I'm curious what other people think about that.
You should. I don't think you should go behind your vestry. The vestry has been kept in the loop that we're working on this. It just is in its, and the vestry also is going to have the final say on how. These are just suggestions.
This seems to me like it's part of, the stewardship of the capital campaign is an ongoing thing. So we, at our church, we don't have a lot of formal programs around stewardship. We talk about it once or twice a year. We certainly don't have a formal capital campaign going, nor have we had for some time. So part of my process is to take the different ideas that our council and the vestry will vet them out, and we'll probably come up with 1 or 2 things. And this seems like it's almost a no-brainer to at least have that message in that process.
Maybe I should have you come and give the PowerPoint of the vestry.
I don't mean to true. Our large ones. It seems like it's something great, but it takes time.
The main thing that would be, if you're on a vestry, the thing that you have to think about with something like this is if you say this is where the bequests go 30 years from now, that's great because you've had all these bequests going into it and all these gifts. If you get a $10 million, or let's say you get a $500,000 bequest next week, and you've got $200,000 worth of maintenance that you could be doing right now that really needs to be done. It's very difficult to say, okay, I know we said we're going to put that in this and just use the income off of it to finance whatever we've decided. But it's very tempting to take that and just sort of devour it and use it for present needs. And what you have to do is sort of take the long view. In the long term, we're going to be able to do a lot more with this money than just this. This is going to be generating income for us for.
One more question, Levi. Is this endowment that the church set up, they're just rolling all weeks in anything, whether it's living or will or whatnot.
Right. That's the theory.
They're putting it in, so it's in a sense, they're asking their donor, those folks donating the living restrictions on it.
Right. And that is important. That's another thing Terry said this morning I think is critical. People may think that they are doing you a favor by doing a restricted request. But 9 times out of 10, it's so much hassle, particularly when it's a small request. If you get a request for $400 and say this can only be used for buttons on stoles or on owls or something, well, I mean, how are you going to keep track of that? How are you going to manage that? I mean, that's just mindless, you know. So you want to encourage people who are very well-meaning. They're not trying to trick you. They're not trying to do something bad. But say, this is the best way that you can help us use your gift to do something good for the glory of God, to carry out our mission. And let them know that those unrestricted requests are just the best way to do that.
Or at least give them limited choices. The program that we developed at St. Mark's in LaGrange, that's Georgia, Illinois, we already had 2 funds that were defined. They weren't actually restricted, but one was an outreach fund and one was for the state class and organ maintenance. And so we added education, which could include clergy and leadership, and that. Oh, we had a scholarship fund, so we expanded that, and then unrestricted. And we publicized that in a brochure encouraging people to add these things to their wills and to make various kinds of requests. But our thinking was that we could direct some of the choices or make it unrestricted. And otherwise, if it was restricted in some other way, then it was up to the vestry whether to accept it or refuse it.
What's the difference in directing here? Directing and restricting.
Because directing, you're saying the restriction would be directed, right? It would still be restricted, but it's restricted for something you want.
By restricted, the gift had been given with a request that it be used for a particular area. And the vestry was honoring that, but it wasn't a legal restriction. So it was a defined account, but not legally restricted. So, for instance, if the building is burned down, God forbid, we could have used it.
Right.
And that's
Here's an example I've shown. One thing. This is what the inside of their book looks like when they're publishing these names. Okay, they got these names. They got the amounts that have been given, birthday, death date. Some of them have, a lifetime member of Trinity Church. And this is another witness too, because here's why people give memorials. I mean, the very word memorial means you will remember. You're memorializing someone. You don't want them to be forgotten. This takes care of that without having to nail a plaque on the wall or build a steeple and put the nameplate up. The other thing that they do, we're not at the place to do this. They are in a wealthier neighborhood, a wealthier congregation. They don't accept restrictions on any requests less than $1 million. If you send one for $500,000 and say it can only be used for new hymnals, we're not taking it. It's not worth our time. I have kind of a funny story about that. My grandpa was a Baptist deacon. Dad's a Baptist minister. Grandpa was a Baptist deacon. And Grandpa got in an argument one time in the church business meeting when we were talking about what would you do if somebody won the lottery and wanted to give it to the church. And of course, if you're a Baptist, gambling is a sin, and so that's tainted money. And so this one guy, very well-intentioned, said, well, we couldn't take that, that's dirty money, the Lord wouldn't bless us. And my grandpa said something to the effect that, well, if the Lord can wash away our sins, I'm pretty sure He can clean up that money and we can use it. So all that's to say, it's very tempting to accept these restrictions because a lot of money is a lot of money. And you just have to decide on an individual basis as a vestry whether it's worth maintaining those restrictions and taking it. Taking the prayer book example, probably not.
It's worth mentioning that sometimes a big request can really rip apart the parish. And St. Margaret's in Annapolis, Maryland, received a very unexpected, huge request. I think it was $2.8 million. I mean, for them it was huge. And their record time very wisely led them to decide to invest it, and for 2 years they wouldn't touch it, and they would spend that time in discernment and prayer about how to use that request. And the results were absolutely phenomenal. in the life of that parish. So rather than tearing it apart, with people arguing about, well, we shouldn't be spending it on ourselves, we should be doing this, and we should, it had a very fruitful effect.
Well, what Terry talked about last night a little bit with endowments, what you don't want for an endowment ever, it's the same thing you don't want for a large bequest to your children. You don't want that to become an excuse not to generate pledge income on your own. Because giving is not about what the church needs. Giving is about my need to say thanks to my maker. Okay, and you got to remind people that. So even if your endowment grows so large, you're throwing off $1 million a year, and the church doesn't need a penny. Let's pray we all get there. We still need to give. We still need to say thank you. Okay, and we're not on the barter system anymore. We're not using chickens and cabbages. Money is how we express our values. And when we put that money in, that's what we're doing the thing that we need to do. I did not talk about, but in your life planning manual, there's a whole section about planning your funeral and transmitting those wishes to your rector. I encourage you to look over that too. So, does anybody have your funeral plan? I've got mine planned. I have. That goes back to my micromanaging. I have it down to exactly which hymns and exactly which gospels and so forth.
Levi, if you go through this like you said, and the money is designated for building and ground maintenance, or however you word it, if situations change years down the road and maybe the church did build a new building or something, and you have way more money than you were going to need for maintenance, can that be changed down the road?
I think you could change it for future gifts, and this is what we're going to do going forward. But if you've represented to somebody that this is what
up to this point, this money stays.
Right.
Can I ask you a question? In a church that size, it probably wouldn't happen, but sometimes churches need to close. And if you close and you still got money that's designated for the church, what do you do?
It goes to the diocese.
Yeah, my understanding of it is, even when the church is open, we're only going to trust as a parish for the diocese. So,
Okay.
I mean, that's
It may still carry the same restrictions. But,
right.
but
If what?
It may still carry the same restrictions, but it goes to the diocese.
So,
Just like the property belongs to the diocese.
right. This is
In
the
the Episcopal Church, who determines whether the church is going to close or not?
the bishop.
So even if you have people that are able to keep the thing going,
No, a bishop would rather cut off an arm than close the parish, trust me.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the bargain that we've made as Episcopalians, right? We know how this works. In Baptist church, it doesn't go, you can split up the money, you can vote on it, In the Episcopal church,
our church, the congregation owns the building.
Right.
But that can be good or it can be bad. I'm not saying one way or the other.
Thank you all for coming. I know sometimes this stuff can be tedious, but I appreciate your presence, and I hope that we've learned something that we can take away. Who asked? Was it you that asked for email addresses yesterday and stuff? No?
A roster, yes.
Okay.
And I also want, this isn't related to the workshop, but you've been doing the video of the plenary sessions. When I asked last night if those would be available, and you said they'd be online, did you mean the plenary sessions, or did you mean those videos that Terry was showing?
The plenary session.
Great, that's what I want.
And let me give you our website. You probably already have it, but I don't think we put it anywhere in our org material. So that's one thing. I'm already filling out my own mental feedback form. Can you see that? Not very well. St. Peter's, Chicago. St. Peter's, STPETERS, Chicago.org.
When do you think these are?
When do I think they'll be up?
What, this PowerPoint you mean?
Or no, you're posting the videos then?
Of different sessions. Probably, I would say by the middle of September. I'll be honest with you, I'm doing it at home, so it'll be as fast as I can get my computer to do it, and I can get the time in my evenings to do it, they'll be online.
Thank you.
Also, if anybody's interested in the PowerPoint, let me give you my email address. LS Harris 99. An auspicious year, that was the year I graduated high school. LS Harris 99 at gmail.com. And I can send you, I'm happy to send you the one that I didn't pay. I think I put it on the front of my thing. This is amended from the Diocese of Olympia. They had a similar, well actually it's kind of morphed into its own thing because I talk a lot more about Illinois law and things. But if you ever are needing something from Stewardship, Google Diocese of Olympia, and they have got a lot of great stuff about stewardship and plan giving, and a lot of it's downloadable that you can just use right in your church. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't get applause at home, so I'll take it where I can get it.
The
What I'm
plenary
gonna-
session is in the church.
Yes, plenary session will be at the church.
2:45, is it?
Yeah, I think we'll have a little bit of a break.
I think there's a break now from now until.
3.
It's 3 o'clock, yeah, got it, yeah.
What I'll do is I'll come on this roster